it can be really, really tough to follow in a star or superstar's footsteps. It really can be, because in a lot of ways, even if you're a similar type of talent or player, athlete, you're just not going to live up to that standard. It can be a really tough task to be following in somebody else's footsteps instead of kind of making your own path forward. Now, I think certainly that can be true when you talk about quarterbacks, whereas you follow behind this dynamic kind of dual threat guy and you're more of like the traditional pocket passer. You know, even if you're a really, really good pocket passer, like a Mac Jones, you just don't have the same sizzle, the pop, the sex appeal of a Tua Tagovailoa. And it can be tough to immediately follow him, because in part it means that you had a limited number of starts in your college career. It means that you're going to be compared in a lot of ways to this guy that came before you, whatever they did or have not done so far at the NFL level. So it's tough. And I will say, to his credit, that Mac Jones certainly did big things at Alabama in this 2020 season, to the point where I would have to surmise that Bama fans really didn't think about Tua anymore or miss Tua that much. I mean, and frankly, why the hell would you? Because it was with Mac Jones that you had the better offense. It was with Mac Jones that you won the national title. So I thought Mac did pretty well to get out of Tua's shadow and establish himself as a prospect for this 2021 NFL draft. But now when you look at Mac Jones and you look at him as a prospect, this is where you start to hear about the, he went to Bama and Bama hasn't produced a bunch of big-name stud quarterbacks in the league, when you could also say that, frankly, about a lot of schools, a lot of them. Like, it's a very important thing where sometimes you might look at that system and you say, okay, there might be some concerns there, but you have to look at each individual prospect on their own merits, their own skills, their projectable traits and talents, etc. And I certainly think there are projectable traits that lead you to believe that Mac Jones could be a successful starting quarterback in the National Football League. He's got decent size. He's not built like a truck or anything, but, you're about 6'3", 215-ish. That's more than big enough to play at the position and have teams feel comfortable with your size and being able to hold up. When you look at Mac Jones, though, there's a lot of precision in his game. Really, really accurate passer to all three levels. And from a mental standpoint, in terms of his processing, his decision-making is really good. He knows when to go to the check down. He knows when to take the chance. He's got the ability to recognize what the defense is doing both pre-snap and during the play. A guy that you see being able to go through his progressions and not only go through them, but come back to them. If he gets moved off of his spot a little bit, he can still, when the structure breaks down a little bit, he can still improvise even within the pocket. But a guy that you think of purely from the mental aspects of the game, you can see it there in Mac Jones's film in 2020 at Bama, and even a little bit when he played in 2019. Like, it's there in abundance. Like, he's a guy, not the most mobile, which is going to be one of the knocks on him. And I would say this, is that timing is everything. You guys have heard that, I'm sure, saying a lot in life. And it's true. If this draft was 15, 17, 18 years ago, there's no question in my mind that Mac Jones would be battling it out for quarterback one, and I think he would be. Yes, over Zach. Yes, over Trevor, because at that time, they would look at the mental aspects of the game, Mac Jones's mentality, his intelligence for football. They would look at his mechanics. They would look at the accuracy, and they would value those things more than they might, let's say, an arm strength and mobility. Now, as you go into 2021, those physical tools matter more. The ability to extend plays, the ability to make those elite throws into tight windows on a rope matter more than they ever have. So it's why we're not talking about Mac Jones being a QB1 or QB2 in this draft. Game has changed. Approach has changed. View on skill sets has changed. But there's no question when you talk about pro-ready passers, like purely you put them in from day one and they're ready to be a productive passer in the league, Mac Jones might be the best prospect in this draft. And you say, well, you've got Trey Lance is QB2. Right behind Zach Wilson is QB1. You've got Trevor Lawrence as QB3. Like, why do you say that? Because that's just one component, one element of it. I look at those other three guys and I see more physical upside. Trevor Lawrence has more abilities as a scrambler and as a runner, and that matters more in today's game. Trey Lance has more of those abilities, and he has a much, much stronger arm. Trevor Lawrence has a stronger arm than Mac Jones. Trey Lance, Zach Wilson have a stronger arm than Trevor Lawrence. And again, those skills matter. But we shouldn't totally and completely sweep aside the skills that a guy like a Mac Jones brings to the table. You're going to say, well, what about the weaknesses? Like, what are the glaring things? You typically hear about three things. Number one is that he came from Alabama and or he doesn't have a ton of starting experience. I'll ignore the Bama piece because I think I've talked about that enough already. Like, that can largely be crap. It can be. But the piece about not making enough starts, like everybody talks about Trey Lance and his limited experience and so forth. I believe Mac Jones has technically had fewer starts in his career than Trey Lance did. I understand different conferences, different levels, and Trey Lance's starts primarily all came in 2019. But let's not pretend like Mac Jones has an incredible depth or world of experience here. You could say he got the chance to sit behind Tua. He got to play some in 2019. He got coached by Nick Saban, but if you look at that offensively, is that a great thing or not? I don't know. But I don't think that's as much of a concern, especially when you look at the mental aspects of the game. Like, you could see NFL mindset. You could see NFL mentality. You could see advanced knowledge, understanding, and instincts for the game as a pocket passer, as kind of a pocket general, a field general, his ability to recognize and react to what he sees, and not just process, but react and react quickly and throw with anticipation. Like, those are beautiful skills that Mac Jones has. So I think the experience piece doesn't matter so much. The mobility and the arm strength can. Now, the mobility piece, you're going to look and you're going to say, he's kind of a lead foot. I wouldn't call him quite a lead foot, but he's not going to get you a ton of big plays with his feet. He's just not. That's the reality of it. He's just not. He's a guy that may be in a bind on 3rd and 5. If you don't keep a spy in, he can get you 6 yards or maybe 8. But he's definitely not a game breaker as a runner. He's certainly not somebody you anticipate when all things break down and you get all types of chaos that he's going to be able to move around, scramble around, roll around until he finds his guy. That's not going to happen either. But enough movement skills within the pocket to buy himself a little time. The slow, kind of subtle rollouts to the right or to the left. I think he's got enough of that where it will be a concern a little bit at times in the NFL, especially if you've got a team that can generate great interior rush or great edge rush. But by and large, is not enough of a concern that prevents you from being high on the guy or thinking that he doesn't have big potential. And then you come to the arm strength. Look, I wish Mac Jones had a laser for an arm. He doesn't. The question is, does he have enough NFL arm? And I think that's mostly yes. Like, in relation to this draft, he certainly falls behind the other big-name guys in this class. There's no question, even some of the smaller-name guys. Like, he's middle of the pack and lower in terms of his arm strength. And you look at my grade, it's kind of middle of the pack, and I'm probably even being a little generous there. I think sometimes, though, when you can throw with the anticipation and the instincts and the reaction speed that Mac Jones does, the arm strength doesn't matter as much. Doesn't matter if you have a hose for an arm, if you're slow as hell to recognize and diagnose and react to what you're seeing, and then you got this big funky wind-up like a Jamie Newman, let's say, where you come all the way behind your head, almost Cam Newton style. Like, you know, that arm strength is great, but it only matters but so much. Where you could say Mac Jones gets a lot out of himself. Now, I would argue, even though I didn't grade him lower for his mechanics, I would say that he loses a little bit of his arm velocity with his mechanics because he has this tendency to kind of open up his body and fall away from his throws sometimes. And you kind of think about this like a golfer. And if you are a golfer, you'll kind of get what I'm saying here is that you try to move too much of your body when you're coming to swing through the ball. Like, you'll either fly your hips open way too far and then your club face is cutting across, or you try to sit there and you try to really muscle and power away at the ball, and as a result, you come swinging through entirely with your upper body and you have no real lower body movement, like either way, bad things are typically going to happen when you do that. You're going to get yourself in bad hitting positions. When you get to the ball, your club face is going to be open, it's going to be closed, you're not going to be hitting from the optimal launch angle, etc. And I kind of equate that similarly with Mac. It was something I didn't see every time, but there were times I thought that he could have been a little calmer in terms of setting up his base, stepping into his throws, and he loses a little bit of velocity when he doesn't set himself, and even a little bit of accuracy, but still really, really good ball placement on short and intermediate throws, and the back shoulder fades and the fade patterns up top. Like, really good accuracy pretty consistently that I saw. One of the better, more accurate arms and better guys in terms of ball placement in this draft. But you have to think about, like, how much does that lack of arm strength tap his upside? And I kind of come at you like this. If you think he's Kirk Cousins, what's he worth as a draft pick? And don't be like the smart ass of Kirk Cousins totally sucks. No, Kirk Cousins is not elite. That's true. But he doesn't suck. Like Mitchell Trubisky sucks. You see the difference? If you had a guy that you said, hey, he's going to be Kirk Cousins for a decade or so, where would you draft him? Might not be top 1, top 5, top 10, but probably somewhere towards the tail end of round 1. But when you look at a lot of these traits and a lot of these skills, the other player that he reminds me of quite a bit is Matt Ryan. And, you know, when you throw out the bigger name comparisons, you always kind of go, oh, slow down, partner. But, you know, it does remind me a lot of Matt Ryan. I think Matt Ryan has a little bit more arm, certainly, than Mac Jones, but a lot of the other traits are there. Matt Ryan wasn't incredibly mobile. I don't think Matt Ryan was really known for having an absolute howitzer of an arm coming out of Boston College. I don't remember that. Good arm, but not special arm. But a lot of the other mental aspects I thought he did have. And I see similar for Mac Jones. Now, if I tell you Mac Jones is going to be a Matt Ryan, you know, where would you draft him? Realistically, you'd feel a lot more comfortable probably about drafting him in the top 10 and maybe potentially even the top 5. The point I'm getting at is that's what these teams are going to have to think about in this draft. Do they think he's a Kirk Cousins or do they think he's a Matt Ryan? In terms of absolute floors in this draft, like I could argue his floor, to use Jerry Angelo speak, is as high as anybody's potentially. Because you can see the mental traits and the accuracy easily translating to the next level. But you could also see one of the lower ceilings because how much more can you really get out of him physically? How much better can he really get in terms of the mental aspects? And how much could that adjust or compensate for the lack of really high-end athletic tools? It's a fair question. I think if you think he's a Matt Ryan type of quarterback, then you don't bat an eye if he's there for you to take in the top 10. I think if you think he's more of a Kirk Cousins guy, then you start thinking maybe like, 15 to 25 feels more like the right draft range. Now, I've got a first-round grade on him. He's my QB4 in this draft. He's behind Lawrence. He's behind Lance. He's behind Wilson. Because admittedly, oh, God, you guys are going to roast me for saying this. I like my QBs with tools, okay? But seriously, those physical tools, they matter. And as great as some of the things that Mac Jones does are, I think there are some limitations to him. Now, this comes down to the 49ers and whether or not the 49ers might potentially draft him at pick 3. Like, if Mac Jones was the only other quarterback available and they traded up to get him at 3, I'd be like, okay. Personally, would not be my choice if I'm the 49ers. I get that he might be a fantastic fit for what Shanahan wants to do. But you trade up that much, you better get guys with special traits and special tools. And I don't think Mac Jones has those. I think Mac Jones is going to be a quality starter in this league for a long time. Could be one of those guys in a couple of years we're talking about in that franchise quarterback 8 to 12 type of category. High-end Matt Ryan, low-end Kirk Cousins. If he improves some of these other areas even a little bit more, it could be even more dangerous. If he gets a little more athletic, and you can work on and develop those things, believe it or not, if you can get your arm a little bit stronger, like, he could be really, really good. It's just I'm betting on some of the other guys and their physical skills and their physical tools a little bit more than I am in Mac Jones in this draft class. But I like what I've seen. I think for a team like a Carolina or New England sitting there at 15, wanting to trade up and get him, like, shit, I'd even worry if Detroit ended up drafting him at 7. I feel like somebody, whatever they end up doing here, he could even be Atlanta. Hell, who knows, at pick number 4. Have them learn under Matt Ryan. Somebody's going to get themselves a quality 12 to 15-year starter in the league when they take Mac Jones.